There is an item in SkyBlock so obscure it took an entire year to be discovered. It involved thousands of players solving an extremely elaborate scavenger hunt, which included things like the evolution of life, complex math formulas, and even time travel. Today, I'll be showing you how this hunt was solved by explaining our thought process behind each of the 20 different steps. I'll also explain why I was not only willing to spend over 3 billion coins on just one of these steps, but also why the community was willing to spend an entire year on this hunt, even if it was for just one single item. This is the hunt for the Kuudra Mandible. Also, real quick, if you end up enjoying this video, consider using code PIG in the Pigicial store for 5% off. You get a nice discount and I get a small kickback, and it lets me make longer videos like this one from time to time. Alright, let's get into it. It all started in late April, when a massive new game update rolled to SkyBlock, replacing the previously outdated Blazing Fortress Island with the Crimson Isle. Now this update added hundreds of new items, including the Kuudra Mandible. The Mandible can apply the Chomp Reforged to any fishing rod, which makes it so lava sea creatures fished up have their max health reduced for each unique lava sea creature that you have killed. However, it wasn't clear how much their health would be reduced by, and we couldn't test it because nobody was selling the item. We also knew it probably wasn't easy to obtain, because months before its release, the Hypixel developer named Dueces said he would be making an extremely difficult hunt, and considering his previous one was for an item called the Golden Ball, which just so happens to look precisely like the Mandible and sold for hundreds of millions of coins when it was first obtained, the hunt was on. Depending on if the item was good, the first person who obtained the Mandible could possibly sell it for billions of coins. It all started with Kuudra, a giant tentacle monster that can be fought by speaking to this guy on the Crimson Isle. When you fight them, you get sent to a separate area, and after you return for the first time, various new NPCs appear in the island, one of which is the Kuudra Archaeologist. They talk about how they found an ancient artifact of Kuudra with some weird writing on it, but there's a problem. It seems to be missing some information, meaning they aren't able to figure out what it means. The writing refers to this math formula, better known as an integral, and we quickly realized we would need to find two different numbers to plug into its bounds to get a new number out of it. But what could we possibly do with a new number? Well, meet the Kuudra Believer, one of the other NPCs who shows up after you defeat Kuudra. You can donate coins to them to prove you believe in the return of Kuudra, and our thinking was that if we were to donate enough coins to them, or a specific amount of coins, perhaps they'd give us the Mandible, or at least something else to help us find it. First, we needed to find two different numbers that, when plugged into the formula, would give us an output that was reasonably small enough to donate. Luckily for us, it only took a few days to find something. There's a massive cathedral on the Crimson Isle, and if you go into it, you can find an NPC named Scholar Alien. They talk about how the books in the cathedral contain a great deal of knowledge about the island, but only true mages can access them, and they even doubt your ability to reach that potential. So, naturally, we did what any logical person would do. We decided to click on every bookshelf with as much intelligence as possible, since being a mage in SkyBlock mainly means increasing that stat. It was kind of a weird idea, but regardless, I recruited a small team of hunters to start clicking, and within less than an hour, we found our first clue. By clicking on this specific bookshelf with over 4,000 intelligence, we got two numbers, 2 and 22. We then rushed back to the Kuudra Archaeologist, plugged the two numbers into the formula, and got a new number, 37,382,880. Then we went to the Kuudra Believer, gave him the 37 million coins, and then we got nothing. This was kind of a letdown, but shortly after this, we started assembling a large set of ideas, and while many of them were interesting in their own right, one of the more exciting ones was block coordinates. We started by splitting the 37 million number into 4 possible locations, but by filtering out the 3 we couldn't reach, because they were literally just the void, we were left with this block on this wall underneath the blazing volcano. Now, when it came to the hunt, our mindset generally included testing things with as many active conditions as possible. So in this case, that meant clicking the block with various items held, pets equipped, armor sets worn, and even explosions going off. But despite all of these combinations, the block did nothing. And as a result, we kinda put the idea on the back burner while we looked into some other ones for the time being. But after about 2 weeks and none of the ideas worked, there was one left just kinda sitting rent-free in our heads. What if we clicked on the block for as many hours as possible? It was certainly a stretch, but up to this point, we had only clicked on the block for no more than 5 minutes at a time. But somehow, against all odds, this idea worked. After clicking on the block For 2.5 hours straight, we were able to open a menu to claim the first ever set of Kuudra relics in all of SkyBlock. And this was only the first of multiple different items we would obtain, because shortly after, one of the hunters who clicked, named Pogo Duck, brought his relic to the archaeologist. And in return, the archaeologist rewarded him with the first ever pair of Kuudra follower leggings. Then immediately after this, I did the same thing and got edition 2 of the leggings. And since there was a full set bonus, it was now a race against others to see who could get the earliest editions for the following 3 armor pieces, and you'll see how this plays out as the video progresses. Despite all this though, there was a small problem, which was that even though we had obtained the relic, most people couldn't. And it wasn't because they didn't click on the block for 2 hours. When we got the relic, we clicked on the block with a Devon's drill in her hand during a volcano eruption. But for some reason, this only seemed to work in certain lobbies we would randomly stumble upon. In fact, we only got the relic once we switched lobbies after clicking for 2 hours. So it seemed like there was some sort of lobby specific condition that we didn't know about that allowed us to get the relic. But in order to discover that, we would have to move on to the next section of the hunt. Now, with the discovery of the armor, an image that had been taken a month prior that had previously gone unnoticed began to resurface. It's a screenshot of a Hypixel admin holding a Kuudra follower artifact, an epic accessory that, when in your accessory bag, grants you a permanent 50% damage reduction from Kuudra followers, which is a mob in the Kuudra fight. Now this was pretty exciting, due to its similarities with the armor set and the fact that there were 5 main Kuudra NPCs that seemed to have something going with them. This seemed to confirm that 4 of the NPCs would likely give us an armor piece, considering one already did, and if we wore the entire set to the last one, they would probably reward us with the artifact as well as the mandible. And let's talk about those 3 other NPCs. Starting off, we have the Kuudra Lore Master. They talk about how they've been studying the ancient texts of Kuudra, and how they used to collect magma cream and netherrack back in the day. Next, we have Arch, who, just like the Kuudra Believer, also talks about the return of Kuudra, and if we want them to return, then we'll have to put aside our differences and stand united, so there's something going on there. Finally, we have Draku. Their dialogue is extremely vague, and they straight up tell us they don't want to speak to us, so we decided to put them off until we finished the other NPCs, just in case their dialogue would change from us wearing the entire armor set. And after holding a short poll, we decided to focus our energy on the Lore Master. Initially, we tried giving them various items related to magma cream and netherrack, since they told us they had collected them in the past, but after many ideas where that didn't work, we quickly switched our attention to the ancient text of Kuudra that they had been actively studying. One of the ideas we liked a lot was the possibility of the Lore Master replying to certain lines of dialogue that we would send in chat, since we knew there were some other NPCs who function the exact same way. And by doing this with some of the dialogue set in the Kuudra fight, they replied, "Wow, that is a classic. I wish I could give you something, but I just don't have that much anymore. Maybe if we met in the past, I would have something for you." You heard it here, folks. In order to find a single piece of armor in Minecraft, we would have to do the impossible. Time travel. Now, time travel is typically a tremendously difficult task, but luckily in this case we weren't left empty-handed. If you head just over 100 blocks from the Lore Master, you can find these 3 mage NPCs. They talk about a strange disturbance on the nearby island and how it might have to do with time travel. And there were 2 different ideas we had for this, and I'll let you decide which one you think it should have been. The first idea was related to the fact that the closest island to these NPCs, aside from the Crimson Isle, is the Deep Caverns, and if you go there, you can find a previous version of the Crimson Isle, which was the Blazing Fortress. But it's not just that. All of the surrounding islands are nearly 2 years outdated, and since the Lore Master wanted to meet in the past, it seemed decently likely for them to be around here. Okay, wait, hold on. The old Blazing Fortress is clearly unintentional. Do you actually think they would use something that is probably a bug and turn it into a feature? And also, your idea ignores the obvious actual candidate for time travel, the Rift. You see, when the Crimson Isle was released, a strange particle rift was added to the top of the mountain in the hub. Now, this may seem out of the ordinary, but I can prove to you that this is related to time travel. Look, I have this item called a journal entry, which precisely explains the lore of SkyBlock. The entry known as the Follower talks about this magical breach in specific and how not only were people trying to travel through it, but how it literally gave people visions from a different time. I mean, one of the visions even has a group of adventurers from the past. So clearly this is the solution, and I don't know how you could possibly argue it otherwise. Yeah, but how do you actually plan on doing that? I mean, the entry even says the scientists never succeeded in traveling through it, and even if you were going to, how would you do it? You can't interact with the rift at all, it's completely intangible. Now, this debate went on for about 11 whole days straight, until eventually, a screenshot was posted showing that the Kuudra lore master could be found in the Blazing Fortress. But we had checked the spot multiple times beforehand and they weren't there. It's like they had just magically shown up. So why would they be here now if they weren't there before? Well, let's start with their dialogue. Have I met you before? I'm getting some deja vu, which was a pretty weird response for an NPC who we had not met up to that point. Now, the future version of the lore master told us they collected tons of magma cream and netherrack in the past. As a result, while they were there, we tried giving them all sorts of combinations of both items, as well as items related to them, but they just kept feeling deja vu. I said while they were there, because to our surprise, less than 13 hours later, they vanished. Right in front of us. And it wasn't just that, nearly all of the netherwart behind him was gone too, which was strange, but then 24 hours later, the netherwart grew. So it seemed like the netherwart was some kind of indicator for when the lore master would reappear, and over the next week we kept track of its growth, so that by the time they did show up a week later, this happened.
Oh!
Have I met you before? I'm getting some deja vu.
Hey guys, have we tried bringing a sea emperor to Jake?
Okay, dude. Wait, I got it. Too bad you didn't put in the effort to collect them yourself. Wait, I have to collect these myself? Huh? Even after presenting them with an entire inventory of enchanted magma cream and netherrack, it still wasn't enough. The lore master did have a good point. We didn't have the amount of resources in our collections to match what we needed to give them. For example, I had manually grinded 13,000 netherrack on my own, but we needed to give them 164,000 worth of it in our inventory. But even after someone manually grinded more than that amount of each item, their dialogue was the exact same as before. Now, remember that pogo duck guy from earlier in the video and how he got the first pair of Kuudra follower leggings and I got the second? Well, both him and I wanted to get edition 1 for this armor piece. We didn't have any ideas left other than increasing our collections further, and since nobody was willing to replace their minions with magma cube minions and mindlessly collect netherrack for dozens of hours on end, well... that should be enough. And with the lore master about to show up 1 week later, this happened.
Wow, that's a lot of resources.
Wait, you took mine. You took mine.
No.
You got it?
I got them. First edition, let's go.
Bruh.
You got it?
After grinding 5 million netherrack and 5 million magma cream, Pogo had obtained the first ever pair of Kuudra follower boots. But it didn't work for me because I only had 4.5 million collection and not 5 million. Luckily, before the lore master disappeared, I did manage to get to the 5 million mark, and as a result, I got edition 2 of the boots, meaning we now had matching editions for the first 2 armor pieces, and we were now 50% done with the hunt. Now, of course, locking an armor piece behind these requirements was kind of ridiculous, but there was some good news. For one, we realized that the requirements for co-op collection, meaning other people on your profile could help you grind it, and 2, after not finding the hidden Kuudra relic requirement for nearly a month, a missing indicator was added in-game, revealing that we had to click on the block during a particular type of volcano eruption that was previously nearly impossible to identify. And when we got our relic, our volcano eruption was luckily the right type. As for the rift in the hub, it was later revealed that it'll be used for some future content update, heavily involved in the lore of SkyBlock and possibly even time travel. So our idea wasn't actually too far off. And with all that behind us, it's time to move on to the next step of the hunt, the Kuudra Believer. I want to preface this part of the video by saying that the Kuudra Believer contained the most difficult, expensive, and time-consuming steps out of any NPC in this hunt. And with that in mind, it all started with some simple dialogue. Hello, adventurer. Are you a believer in the return of Kuudra? If you are, why don't you offer up some coin to show your belief? It is said that Kuudra once blessed this lava pool. Maybe Kuudra will show favor upon you. Right off the bat, we had a lot of questions. What exactly is the return of Kuudra? Why did Kuudra bless the lava pool? And why do we have to donate coins to show our belief? Luckily, it didn't take long to answer some of these questions. The first thing we realized was what the lava pool blessing actually was, because in the very first week of the hunt, it was discovered that if you fish from this specific lava pool, called the Flag Blast pool, you have a 1 in 1,000 chance of fishing up a special type of squid, called a Flag Blast, which just so happens to have 500 million health. And the second thing we realized was that the believer would reply with different dialogue depending on how many coins we donated. Take a look at this table. If you present 0 coins, they simply reply with disappointing, maybe one day you will believe. But if you donate between 1 and 99,000 coins, they say, thank you for your offering. Kuudra will be pleased. If you donate between 100,000 and a million coins, they say, "What a great offering, Kuudra will be pleased." And finally, and most importantly, if you donate at least 1 million coins or more, they say, "Wow, you truly are a believer. Kuudra will bless you." What was interesting about that response was that, unlike the others, it was the only one to mention the idea of Kuudra blessing things. However, the wording "Kuudra will bless you" made it seem like it would only happen in the future, likely if we did something specific to make it happen. This led to two different questions. One, how do we activate the blessing? And two, what would the blessing even do? Well, we weren't sure, but there was one big question that sort of guided us towards the answer. Is the Flag Blast a baby Kuudra? At first, this may sound strange, but here's the thing. Kuudra is referred to as a giant lava kraken, both in-game and on the Crimson Isle release notes. And in real life, a kraken is just a giant squid. And since the Flag Blast, a regular-sized squid, only spawns from a lava pool blessed by Kuudra, a giant squid, the connection was undoubtedly there. There was even some additional evidence to support the idea, since we knew Kuudra had stolen an item called sulfur, which in the lore of SkyBlock is known to evolve creatures. This helped provide us with a framework we could use to test ideas we were actually confident in. Every so often, after curating a collection of them, we would spend roughly 3 to 5 hours fishing for a Flag Blast, bring the Flag Blast to the Kuudra believer, then donate 1 million coins to show our belief, and then try out a bunch of things with the Flag Blast, such as, but not limited to, bringing the Flag Blast to the Kuudra believer, splashing various potions on it, donating specific values to the Kuudra believer, merging the Flag Blast with the Magma Boss, performing rituals on it, killing it using various different methods, bringing it to a sulfur block and the top of the volcano, mainly to Odger, using the double hook attribute to get multiple squids at once, evolving it using sulfur and clicking on it with other various items, sacrificing it to the Flag Blast pool, and way more ideas that I could not fit into this little sequence. And after an entire month of testing, on July 29th, it was discovered that if you brought a Flag Blast to the Kuudra believer and then donated 4,202,022 coins to them, they would give you herring the fish, meaning we had spent an entire month solving one singular step to get an item that was not even an armor piece. Now, this 4.2 million number converts to April 20th, 2022, which is the release date of the Crimson Isle. However, I'll just say now, if the logic is that it's the day Kuudra returned, I think that's a bit weird, since Kuudra didn't exist before the Crimson Isle came out. So, I'm not sure how they could have returned when they didn't exist beforehand, and the Crimson Isle didn't exist beforehand. Moving on to step 2, let's talk about herring the fish. Now, among various hunts, there's a concept used somewhat frequently called a red herring, which refers to a lead or clue added strictly to throw people off. So, already this wasn't looking very good. Also, the item's lore says this. Sometimes patience is the key to victory. Sometimes it leads to very little, and it seems like it's not worth it. And you wonder why you waited so long for something so disappointing. Honestly, it kind of seemed like the admins were mocking us for finding these things, but regardless, we kept on looking, and only about 5 minutes later, a hunter named Stuffy found something interesting. By using a mod to view the NBT data on the herring item, he found this. Not a hint. F of x, y, x cubed, blah 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 blah, a bunch of maths. So now we had a red herring, as well as some weird, confusing math equation named not a hint, which led to some interesting questions. Is the red herring referring to the not a hint text, meaning that it actually is a hint, and we should use the math, like reverse psychology, or is none of this used whatsoever, and we've just been baited by the admins? Is the text for sometimes patience is the key to victory relevant, and a clue, or is that also not used? Or is it even a red herring at all? I mean, it's called a herring to fish, and there's a type of fish in real life you can eat called a herring, so it could have just been referring to that, and not the red herring concept. Also, right after the herring was discovered, the Hypixel admin named JacobRuby, who would soon get heavily involved in the hunt, said something with the hunt has changed, so clearly that meant something. For weeks, many of these questions sparked a divide among the community, as some people thought the item and the math were used for the next step, whereas others thought it was entirely useless and that we had nothing to go off of. Personally, I thought the math was used and that we would have to donate some obscure number from the herring to get even more hidden dialogue. Shortly after, however, things would take an unexpected turn, all because of one particular image. The boar. On May 21st, a user named AVX45 sent this image to the Discord. A mind-blown boar. Now on its own, this image was just whatever. But as time passed, the picture got reposted again and again to the point that when Wesley, one of the hunters, decided to create a Discord bot containing several hunt-related features, it also included a special command, /boar daily. You could run this command once a day to collect a random, special type of boar. And after some time, someone, who I'm now realizing was myself, jokingly brought up the idea of a hint boar. The idea was that if it was rolled, Jacob would have to give us a hint. And he agreed to this, but only if it was exceedingly rare. And only 10 days later, it was rolled for the first time, to which Jacob said this: "The tides are not high on a particular man's shore." Now, I'll just say now, unlike the hints from the later hint boars in this video, this one was just terrible, even in hindsight, and Jacob even said he wanted it to be useless. In fact, it was so bad that 2 weeks later, Jacob had to say this: "Have we tried looking into Arch?" Now, at first glance, this hint may seem really useful. It specifically tells us to look into an NPC that just so happens to fit into the previous tip, since Arch is one of the highest NPCs on the map. However, just like the other main NPCs in this video, Arch only shows up after you defeat Kuudra, and so far, none of the so-called side NPCs, like Scholar Alien or the Three Mages, have been like that. Additionally, on Hypixel's alpha network testing server, the 5 main Kuudra NPCs are disabled, but the side NPCs aren't. Given this information, it wouldn't make sense for Arch to be considered a side NPC in Step 2 of the Believer. So what this hint really meant was that when it came to figuring out Step 2, we were so incredibly far off and wrong with our ideas to the point that Jacob had to intervene and tell us to step back by looking into a completely different NPC. And he even confirmed this just a few days after, which was pretty frustrating to hear. However, Arch only took a few weeks to solve, meaning our break from the Believer was pretty brief. And to demonstrate why, let's start with their dialogue. "Hello, traveler. Kuudra will return one day, but we must first put aside our differences and be ready. We must show Kuudra that we stand united for its return." So just like the Believer, Archer also talks about the return of Kuudra, but in this case, instead of showing our belief in the return, we have to stand united for their return. But how could we do that? Well, it all started in the first few weeks of the hunt, where it was discovered that if you wear a complete set of Ember or rekindled Ember armor and then spoke to Arch, they'll reply with additional dialogue. They call your armor set very impressive and say Kuudra would be impressed. So right off the bat, we already knew one of the conditions. The second part of this seemed to revolve around the idea of having multiple people. This is because Arch specifically says we have to stand united for Kuudra's return, which, while it could just mean you and Arch, seemed more likely to represent a large group of people. However, this still wasn't working, so just like the block in the volcano, we tried what we called condition stacking, meaning we would all try having the same pets out, equipment active, enchantments applied, and even the same items held while speaking to Arch. But after days of testing countless different ideas and combinations, we made no progress. However, this is when things would take a turn for the better. One of the hunters, named SuperDougie117, posted an idea to the Discord that revolved around uniting not by Arch, but by other places instead. And this was for 2 reasons. One, the other NPCs, so the Archaeologist, the Lore Master, and Believer, each required you to go somewhere else to an extent. A bookshelf, a volcano, a large field of netherrack, those sorts of things. And the second reason was more straightforward. Arch just calls you a traveler, so there's that. And to all of this, Jacob said, "Have we tried bringing a sea emperor to Jake?" Now, to give some context, back in 2021, there was a hunt made by Dueces for an item called the Golden Ball, which was solved by bringing a special version of the mob called a Sea Emperor up a mountain to an NPC named Jake. But when people first tried it, they didn't try killing it and respawning it using necromancy, meaning they couldn't get it up the mountain because of the despawn radius of the Sea Emperor, and as a result, the idea was marked off their list. All they had to do was use necromancy to respawn the Sea Emperor. So what this hint really meant was that Dougie's idea was mostly right, but it was missing some small piece of the puzzle to make it the whole thing. So what was missing? Well, if you think about it, if you had to unite with Arch from across the map, unless Arch could somehow be found at a different location, this practically confirmed that you would need multiple people for this to work. You would need someone by Arch who could speak to them to get the game to check that people are united, and you would need multiple people at the other locations to fulfill the conditions established from the initial idea. But what were these different locations? Well, here's a thought experiment. There are 45 different zones you can visit on the Crimson Isle, and you can fit up to 30 people in a lobby all at once. So, hypothetically speaking, what would happen if you were to fill a lobby with people wearing Ember armor, and then have them scattered throughout the island? If enough people were uniting at the correct places, and you clicked Arch at the right time, maybe you would get some new dialogue? Wait, it worked. I got something.
What?
Wait,
Yeah. I'm being dead serious. I got dialogue.
Wait, I
I got the chest plate. I got edition 1.
You already did it! What?
It only took nearly 3,000 hours, but it finally happened. And I can't lie, it was pretty cool. Now, before I get back to the Believer, there's a couple things I want to mention. First off, the precise conditions to get the chest plate, which were actually not that bad. You need at least 6 players from any factions, 2 of them have to be in the Scarleton Plaza, 2 of them have to be in the Dragontail Town Square, and 2 of them have to be pretty close to Arch, within the Stronghold. They all have to be wearing Ember or Rekindled Ember armor, and they also have to have a level 81 or higher Kuudra pet active. Why does it have to be level 81? I don't know. The other thing I want to talk about is the additions. Up to this point, I had gotten Edition 2 on both the previous pieces, whereas Pogo Duck got Edition 1. However, this time the tables had turned, because somehow, even with 5 people surrounding me at Arch, and my very vocal reaction to getting new dialogue, for an entire 11 whole seconds, nobody except Pogo clicked on Arch, meaning after nervously waiting through the response, he obtained Edition 2 of the Kuudra follower chestplate. And then Dougie, the creator of the initial idea, got Edition 3. Previously, for new pieces, we had been trying to maintain our spots in Edition 1 and 2, but now that they had switched, we had a new goal. In order to maintain symmetry, I would try as hard as possible to get the Edition 1 helmet, and then I would let Pogo get Edition 2 right after that. However, let's just say that, unbeknownst to myself at the time, that would turn out to be extremely difficult. 5 days before we solved Arch and got the chestplate, Jacob announced the hint, Kuudra will bless you, which directly refers to the Kuudra Believer's response when you donate 1 million coins or more. After we solved Arch, Jacob also said this, 75 times since the herring was discovered, something took place, but no one noticed. This also went in line with the fact that right after we found the herring, Jacob said something with the hunt has changed, and he shortly clarified after that it simply enabled something. But how? How could we have missed something 75 times over a month and a half? We knew it was somehow related to donating 1 million coins, and we knew it wasn't associated with obtaining a herring since poll results at the time showed that well over 75 people had one. A few days after this hint, after donating 1 million coins, going into a Kuudra fight, and then killing Kuudra, one of the hunters named Talon spotted something peculiar. Off in the distance from the central platform, outside of any area you would typically be, a strange little man was found. His name is the Weird Sailor. He's a man riding on a minecart on top of lava with a tuxedo suit, some clout goggles, and a fedora hat. What else would you expect? And their dialogue was pretty fitting as well. Hi, you want to know a secret? ... I can hold my breath under lava for 15 seconds. ... I heard a legend there is a big fish in these waters. Maybe you could fish it up? ... Anyway, I have a train to catch. I'm going to the circus. Bye. Now, regardless of whatever you or I think of this dialogue, what's important is that there's a lot going on here we can unpack. To start, it seemed like the standalone ... were probably there to separate each thing we had to do, or condition we had to meet, which in this case was for fishing up the big fish. Now, before I show you the solution for this, I want to explain a little bit of our thought process behind it, and then show you how we solved it. And our thought process was fairly simple. Test everything. But that proved to be harder than expected. See, we knew going into this that there would be multiple things we had to do at once, and Jacob even confirmed this. And there were a lot of combinations of things to consider, such as armor sets or armor combinations, fishing rod types, baits, enchantments, pets, reforges, attributes, fishing locations, whether to fish before, during, or after the fight, and even more specific things, like if the skin of the sailor was a clue towards the dark auction. And those were only a handful of the things we considered. The problem was that if we were to write down every combination of conditions we could think of, the number of tests we would have to do would be way too many to count. But eventually, after about 3 weeks of testing, let's just say things became considerably easier. All because of one particular image. The hint boar. Yeah, not a regular boar this time. Now, unlike the last hint boar, which was arguably pretty useless, this one was the polar opposite. See, rather than sending a standard Discord message as a hint, Jacob instead, for this step only, added a new NPC dialogue in-game. More specifically, whenever we spoke to the sailor with any one of the conditions required to obtain the big fish, they would reply with an extra line of dialogue for that specific condition. So they had multiple new lines of dialogue. And after realizing this, it instantly became a race to see who could find as many new lines of dialogue before anyone else. And within just a few hours of testing, we found the right combination. First, we needed the elegant tuxedo armor set. You could say it looks pretty fancy or dashing, and this fits in with the skin of the weird sailor, not the dark auction. Next, we needed the Bonzo mask since they said they were going to the circus and it looks like a clown mask. It also had to have a respiration 1 on it, because this allows you to breathe under lava for 15 seconds. And those conditions were fairly simple to find, in fact they kept coming up in conversation. But the one that we straight up did not realize the longest was that we had to fish with ice bait. Because apparently, these waters is a double meaning. Not only did it mean fish in this general area by the sailor, but it also meant the ice from the ice bait will melt and the lava, therefore turning into these waters. And the only reason we found this was because we were at the point of testing every single bait possible due to a CM Protege hint from another hint boar we got. And finally, after about 3 weeks of testing, it was time to fish up the big fish.
Wait, I got something.
Oh, you got a
Wait,
map?
what?
I was about to say that.
Wait, I got something.
Wet napkin.
Yep, you thought we were gonna fish up the big fish? Well, unfortunately not. Instead, we just got a dumb, soggy piece of paper from fishing in lava. Though, it technically wasn't paper, it was actually a map because, well, this. Yeah, we weren't entirely sure what to make of this. I mean, a cat on a napkin? Okay. And the reality is, it only got worse.
Alright, context for future me. We have noticed a large variety of Among Us characters. And you can notice them by doing certain actions.
Yeah, I don't know what was worse. The fact that there were 29 of these Among Us characters hidden across this image, or the fact that these characters were a clue. A clue for the other part of the napkin I haven't shown yet. The math formula on the item lore. Which goes like this. The total blank plus time times time, all that subtracted from thrice the commencement, then add a blank of yourself, the whole thing elbowed. And if you break apart the formula and write it down as actual math, you'll see that there are 5 main things missing. This was the final step of the Kuudra Believer. We would have to, 1, figure out what all 5 of these blanks are, 2, spend multiple hours fishing for a flag blast, and 3, donate the result of it all to the Kuudra Believer. And keep in mind there were 0 ways of knowing if our inputs were right, or revealing what they were. We were flying blind, and the only way of knowing if all 5 inputs were right would be to sacrifice hundreds of millions of coins and donation values we thought were right. If none of them worked, we would have spent hours fishing and days theorizing, all for nothing. Sure, maybe we could say, oh, that input probably wasn't right, or, you know, in hindsight it makes sense now why that didn't work. We could switch out inputs as we pleased, but at the end of the day, how are we supposed to figure them out when any one input could have countless different values, when there's no obvious theme or scope for what the numbers could be based on, when the hunt has straight up lied to us already, and when just half a week of testing can cost us a dozen hours in fishing, 500 million coins, and a large chunk of morale out of the most dedicated individuals? To answer these questions, I want to start by explaining a bit more about each individual input and the general ideas we had around them. Starting off, we have the total blank. The blank section here is 8 characters long, so we figured we would probably have to find some 8-letter long word that fit in with total, like the total donation to Believer or the total Among Us characters on the napkin, just to name a few. Then we have time times time, or time squared, which was interesting because time could have easily been a changing variable. For instance, it could have meant the in-game or real-life time, or some other consistent value, like how long Kuudra's blessing lasts for. Next, we have all that subtracted from thrice the commencement. Thrice is simply defined as 3 times something, and commencement is defined as the start or beginning of something. Our immediate idea for this was the 4.2 million value from before that we used to get herring to fish, but there were some other ideas as well, and I'll get back to those later. Next, we have a blank of yourself. We were trying to figure out what 2 letters could be linked to a player stat of some kind, so for example, HP for health or MP for magical power. And finally, we have elbowed. While this may seem like a strange word, it simply translates to double, but spelled backwards. And there were a few ideas like dividing by 2, doubling then reversing the number, reversing then doubling the number, and multiplying by -2. And now that I've explained the inputs and the ideas we had, it was time to start donating. See, earlier in this video, I said that half a week of testing would likely cost us around 500 million coins, and this is where it became really apparent. In just a matter of minutes, I gave roughly 110 million coins to the Believer, which was only 4% of all the coins I would end up donating. It certainly didn't help that there was no real theme to go with for these numbers, which was why going forward, most of the values we ended up testing were related to Kuudra, Flagblast, the Napkin, Sailor, Herring, or Believer. After about 5 days of not donating any values, on October 31st, Jacob dropped a particularly strange hint. Have you wondered why the blanks are different lengths? Well, yeah, we had. In fact, every idea we had for the total blank or blank of yourself was based on this, and Jacob was aware of the ideas we had, so why would he say something like this? Well, the hunter from before named Wesley had an interesting theory. What if the blanks weren't the lengths of words we needed, but the lengths of numbers we needed? It was definitely weird because if it was right, then the grammar for the formula would have made a lot less sense. But regardless, not long after Wesley posted the idea, Jacob said, "It's Siampin time," meaning the idea was right, and the only thing we didn't have was the right numbers. Now, this was a big confirmation, and I don't think there was anyone more motivated than Wesley, because just a day later, he quickly wrote a program that would take every input idea we had and then spit out a bunch of numbers for us to donate. Also, when I say us for donating, really I just meant me. See, the hunters were fine with me getting edition 1, and while I knew it would be expensive, I didn't realize just how much it would be. In the first week of testing, I donated just over 100 values to the Believer, which costed roughly 980 million coins. And I didn't just have this type of money lying around, so aside from some hunter donations, it was mainly paid for by selling old rare items, items from the bits shop, and loot from Kuudra fights, since it had recently been revamped by this point, which in turn made it way cooler and much more profitable. Now, from November 10th to the 20th, basically no values were tested, since I wasn't available at all. But when it came back, Jacob decided to confirm one of the inputs. Elbowed. He confirmed that Elbowed was -2. We had to multiply the solution by -2, which was probably the best hint he could have given, since it meant we no longer had to use up to 4 Elbowed modifiers at all times, which in turn would make our tests way more efficient. Over the next 3 days, the rate at which we tested values practically skyrocketed. I spent nearly 700 million coins on the Believer, which in turn mapped to 83 different combinations of the 4 missing numbers. But then 3 days later, this plummeted to 169 million coins, across just 8 different values, because of a new problem we had. Since we were testing combinations way faster now, we quite literally did not have any more numbers to try, and we were just flat out of ideas. To be clear, I wasn't entirely against it. Not losing money for a bit felt pretty good, but I knew deep down that this could not last, and that sooner or later, I would be back to losing billions of coins to an NPC that had given me absolutely nothing in return for over 4 months since herring the fish. By this point, it was December 9th. We were just days away from having been on this step for exactly 2 months, and the hunt had been going on for a whole 7 months now. Nobody wanted this to go on. Not me, the hunters, or even the admins. As a result, Jacob announced several things. First off, he said that the Believer solution was not the same for every player. Huh. See, the input blank of yourself was assumed in every single test to just mean the number 29, since there are 29 Among Us characters, or 29 imposters. Maybe you're an imposter, so 29 of yourself. Yeah, it was a little weird. However, we assumed it was right because Jacob went out of his way to stop us from using 4.2 million for commencement, but he never said anything negative about us using 29, even though we used it 3 times as often. And this may have been because 29 wasn't entirely wrong. Instead, the actual solution, which was confirmed roughly 30 minutes later due to a CM per to Jake hint, was 29 times the length of your Minecraft username. Because somehow the length of your username is supposed to mean yourself? I'm not crazy on it, but that's what it was. But Jacob wasn't done announcing things. In fact, he was far from it. Since most people, including himself, wanted the hunt to be over, he announced Advent of Hints. For the remainder of December, he would give us a hint every day, as opposed to once every few weeks, which meant we would get the helmet pretty soon. Now, frankly, I wasn't sure how to feel about this. On one hand, there was the idea of getting the helmet and finally solving the hunt within just a few weeks, which felt pretty cool. Me and Pogo would probably get the first 2 pieces, and maybe all the money spent wasn't such a waste after all. But on the other hand, there was a part of me that just didn't feel satisfied. We had thought of and donated over 200 distinct numbers on our own, and for us to now get daily hints, it almost felt underwhelming and cheap. Plus, during this announcement, I managed to get every single input idea that we had previously thought of and written down fully debunked, meaning none of our ideas besides Elbowed were right. So aside from donating enough to get 2 inputs confirmed, we hadn't really made any progress. But in hindsight, I think the daily hints were a good thing. For starters, they made the hunt a lot more active and interesting, which was a nice breath of fresh air, but they were also sort of needed in order to make the hunt finish. Because here's the thing, the formula, in a way, was kind of impossible to solve. Now, to give some context, a couple of weeks before we discovered the herring, Jacob sent a message in the Discord saying the hunt was self-sufficient, meaning it didn't involve any outside resources. But as we would later realize, this was flat out wrong. At the time, it was right because, unlike the rest of the hunt, the sailor and the napkin got added to SkyBlock after the message was sent. But following this, Jacob never clarified that his message wasn't true anymore. This was a problem because when we got to the steps formula, we were ruling out any numbers that we couldn't figure out in-game on our own, which included multiple of the correct inputs. Now, to Jacob's credit, his message was mainly written in the context of people trying to decrypt his regular messages to come up with crazy values, not using outside resources or anything. And he couldn't just say, oh, by the way guys, the formula requires some external tools, since that probably would have been too easy. Frankly, I'm not sure how long this step would have taken if any of this played out differently, but given the values I'm about to reveal, I'll let you decide for yourself. Now, each hint acted as some sort of clue for one of the 3 remaining values, starting with total. First, he said one of the numbers is vaguely related to burning, and that one is totally related to grinding. Initially, we were thinking that this was hinting towards netherrack, since you can grind it and it can burn indefinitely. Jacob also said that one of the numbers would be related to a previous NPC in the hunt, and since we needed to grind 5 million netherrack and magma cream for the lore master, there was the possibility that 10 million was the amount we needed for total. But this was debunked roughly 24 hours later, so then we were just confused. Eventually, Wesley brought up the idea of the total amount of netherrack on the Crimson Isle, which at first we were very skeptical of, because you can't figure this value out on your own in-game. Yet, when we told the idea to another admin who had recently gotten involved in the hunt, named Landon, he was strangely for the idea, and he knew what the answer was, so after a few hours of tinkering with multiple world downloads and a program called MC-Edit, we concluded that there was roughly 21,400,000 netherrack on the Crimson Isle, which is a very large number. Now, this value was definitely out of the scope we confined ourselves in for the past 2 months, and so was the one for commencement. There was only one hint for this, and it was from Landon instead of Jacob, who was a lot more direct. Someone said the numbers aren't exclusive to in-game. For one, a post is key. Which post? Think logically. I was looking at the post for the Crimson Isle release, and then the solution became clear. What if the commencement was the forum post ID on the top of my screen? It made sense, since many people often read the patch notes of an update before they play it, and the one value that represents the post is its post ID. And just like before, Landon was also suspiciously for this idea, though not in a way that was as obvious as before. Now, we were only missing one value to get the helmet: time. Now, we actually had quite a bit of information confirmed for this. We knew it was somehow related to the outside world, and that it changed frequently. So after some theorizing, the hunter named Average thought of the day in the year, meaning this value could range from 1 to 366. Then we fished for what would be our final flag blast of the hunt. We brought it over to the Believer, and finally, after 3.5 billion coins and donations, nearly 100 flag blasts fished up, and 3,768 hours, on December 18th, this happened.
Okay. Wow. You truly are a believer. Kuudra will bless you. I got dialogue.
He got it.
Oh my god.
I got helmet.
Send me pig.
GG pig.
Let's go, GG.
The Kuudra follower helmet had been obtained, thus marking the completion of the full set of Kuudra follower armor. Plus, me and Pogo got our matching editions, which was pretty cool. In a way, we had become a true follower of Kuudra, and as a result, we were able to speak to the final NPC, Dracu. In the beginning of this video, I showed you Dracu's dialogue, in which they said, "Do not talk to me, we are not the same." But now, by wearing the full set of Kuudra follower armor, they instead said this: "You might be someone worth talking to, but the time isn't right." Now, going into Dracu, we were told by the admins that they would be one of the most difficult NPCs to solve. Not because we had to spend hours fishing or billions of coins donating or anything even along those lines, but because the solution was just stupidly obscure. And it was a bit too late to change, just like the napkin formula, so because of this, he decided to keep on giving hints for Dracu up until December 25th. First off, the time isn't right response was figured out in just about 5 minutes by Pogo. By speaking to them in a lobby with a cataclysmic volcano eruption, they said, "I could talk to you, but the conditions don't seem right." And as a reminder, we needed a cataclysmic volcano eruption to get the Kuudra relic for the archaeologist way back in the beginning of the video. Volcano eruptions happen in every lobby once every 2 to 2.5 hours, and there's only a 1 in 59 chance for any eruption to be cataclysmic. So this was already a pretty big limiting factor. However, the conditions we needed were not hinted at by Dracu whatsoever, as in not a single line of their dialogue referenced any part of the solution. And this is where Jacob came in. The first thing he said was that Dracu requires cooperation, or a group effort. We weren't sure how many people were needed, but we figured that it probably wouldn't be any more than 6, since that's how many people Arch required. Then, Jacob may or may not have stated that everyone in the lobby had to be involved, which would prove to be a task that was extremely difficult to do. Aside from the fact that getting a cataclysmic lobby was difficult on its own, getting everyone in the lobby to do something specific also sounded extremely difficult, unless you somehow got a cataclysmic lobby with nobody else in it. I mean, the chance for a lobby to be cataclysmic is 1 in 59, eruptions last for 20 minutes and occur every 2 to 2.5 hours, and the chance for any one lobby to be empty is extremely low. Surely that can't happen. Oh. Okay. And finally, after 7.5 months of work, including finding hidden bookshelves, obtaining ancient relics, discovering obscure chat triggers, solving time travel, grinding millions in collections, uniting players together, donating billions of coins, dealing with red herrings, finding weird NPCs, fishing up a big fish, searching for Among Us characters, solving complex math formulas, and having all 3 players in our lobby in the air, it was time to solve the final step of the hunt. You seem like someone of similar interests. I have a shop of some unique items that may interest you. Have a look and see if there's anything you like. First off, we have the Kuudra follower artifact. It can be purchased for 100 million coins, 1024 enchanted red sand, 1024 enchanted mycelium, and 64 Kuudra teeth. And then, we have the Kuudra Mandible. So, yeah, there was just nothing. I mean, there was the artifact, but there was no mandible. The item that started this entire hunt was simply a lie. So, was that it? 8 months of work, all for us to just fail in the end? No, absolutely not. The reality is, the hunt for the Kuudra Mandible was far from over. As I'm recording this, it is currently April 20th, and it's been exactly 1 year since the hunt started, and nearly 4 months since we got the artifact. Now, up until just 2 days ago, not much happened. There were some changes made back in mid-January to make a few steps easier, but aside from that, I've mainly just been spending this time editing and polishing this video. However, very recently, right when I was about to finish editing and call it done, Landon decided to release an update that, well, I just knew I had to include. First things first, let's talk about the mandible, because it got a new texture. Now, instead of it looking like the golden ball, it looks like a different item instead. However, the new texture itself didn't really matter. What was important was just the sheer fact that they updated it, because it meant we could pretty safely assume it was now obtainable. Alongside that, the API also revealed a brand new Kuudra follower relic, which has the same texture as the artifact. All of this, combined with an announcement from Landon that the mandible was actually not a lie, we were ready to get back into the hunt. Let's start with Landon's announcement. It included a series of numbers that, when converted into letters, spelled out one word: Dracu. We rushed over to them and we were greeted with some brand new dialogue. You know, adventurer, I could help you with something, but in order to do so, I need something special. Bring it to me and I will be ready to assist. Now, after just a few minutes of testing different items, we realized that we had to give them a golden ball. Yeah, even though this item had almost nothing to do with the hunt up to this point, it was now officially required. It also became clear that this was a direct continuation from all the previous steps, since in order to give them the golden ball, we had to be wearing the full set of Kuudra follower armor. Anyways, after we gave Dracu the item, he took it from our inventories, and then we all received an exquisite Kuudra teeth plaque, a bacteria proven to decay teeth. This bacteria, however, seems of the highest quality. Maybe you can find a way to break it down, which was certainly an interesting objective. Now, since Dracu gave out new dialogue, people started speaking to the other original NPCs to see if they had any new dialogue. And they did. Starting with the archaeologist, people realized that if they spoke to them with at least 4,500 intelligence, so 500 above the amount we needed to click on this bookshelf nearly a year ago, they would upgrade the plaque to a more rotten version. Or, well, maybe downgrade since the rarity decreased to epic, but we were progressing, which is what mattered. Next, people clicked on Arch with a level 100 Kuudra pet, as opposed to a level 81 or higher from before, and their plaques got converted to rare. They also went to the Believer, who seemed to have a change of heart, since he didn't want to take people's money this time. All I had to do was type decay into the donation box and the rarity changed to uncommon. Now, all of these steps were solved within just 9 minutes of each other. The only other NPC they hadn't solved was the Lore Master, since they didn't give out any new special dialogue. A lot of people thought that they weren't involved and that maybe the Sailor was the last NPC, but that just didn't seem right to me. See, one of the more talked about ideas for this was that, similar to before, we would have to send a specific message in chat in order for the plaque's rarity to change. This would explain why they didn't have any new dialogue yet, and it seemed fitting to me, so I figured I'd go for it. Immediately, I started sending all sorts of messages in front of the Lore Master, various bits of item lore, simple decay requests, some NPC dialogue. Eventually I got around to testing L's dialogue, since that's what we had to type months ago to discover time travel, and after about 10 minutes of going through my chat logs and spamming useless messages, the Lore Master replied, and my plaque was converted from uncommon to common. It was ready to be used. Now, the final step involved the Gatekeeper, because when I clicked on them, there was a new item in their menu, which gave me the option to poison Kuudra's teeth. However, when I clicked on it, they said this. I could help you poison Kuudra's teeth. However, how can I be sure you're a true follower of Kuudra? You need to have something to prove it. Now, this is where it becomes kind of a bruh moment, but also kind of funny at the same time. The reason I wasn't seen as a true follower of Kuudra here was because I didn't have the artifact on me when I clicked the button. However, Pogo did have the artifact on him, meaning when he clicked on it, his plaque was upgraded from common all the way up to special, and upon inspection, his plaque gained an addition. And he was now the owner of the Edition 1 Kuudra Teeth plaque. And then shortly after this, I spoke to them with the artifact and got Edition 2, meaning even after 4 months, the prophecy had remained. Also, when we did this, our Kuudra follower artifacts got upgraded into Kuudra follower relics, meaning this hunt ended up giving us a mythic accessory, which was a nice unexpected bonus. However, we still weren't done, and there was still one final step that remained: the Kuudra Mandible. The last bit of text the Gatekeeper told us was, you might be able to find something special now. This was the final piece of the puzzle, and the last clue we needed to obtain the mandible and finish the hunt once and for all. All we had to do was enter a Kuudra fight one more time.
Oh, there we go. Okay, is this it? Is this it? Is this it?
Mandible.
Is this it? Is this it? Is this it? This is it! Let's go! Mandible acquired!
The Kuudra Mandible had been obtained. It only took 363 days, but it finally happened. And I can't lie, this felt pretty cool. I'm not sure why it took an extra 4 months, but hey, I'll take it. Now, with all of this behind us, there was just one question that remained. Is the mandible actually any good? Well, let's find out. Okay, so right here we have a lava rod with the mandible applied, and if you look at its description, decreases the health of lava sea creatures by 1% for each unique lava sea creature you have killed with this rod in your inventory. And I'm currently at negative 11% health. Now, this can go up to 13%. 10 of those sea creatures are from the Crimson Isle, and 3 of those sea creatures are from the Crystal Hollows. Now, I haven't maxed this yet. I just have to kill a Flag Blast and a Jawbus, but that's only 2% more health, and I just want to demonstrate what this is like so far. So we're just going to fish up the sea creature, and there we go. That is a magma slug with 890,000 out of 1 million health. 11% health has been removed, and it's working pretty well. However, it's actually not working pretty well. Now, you may have noticed that I have this second fishing rod, a starter lava rod, and the reason I have this is because of the Frail 6 enchantment. So I just want to demonstrate how much health Frail removes, and then compare it to the mandible after. Bonk, there we go, another magma slug, and you'll notice 700,000 health out of 1 million. So this thing has 30% less health compared to the mandible bonus of just 11%. But here's the thing, if I look at my mandible rod, it also had Frail 6. Which brings up the issue. Right now, the mandible bonus is currently bugged and is overriding the bonus from the Frail enchantment, meaning it is actually worse to have the mandible on your rod than not have it on your rod. Now, of course, this is going to get fixed pretty soon, so by the time you're watching this, or shortly after this video comes out, it'll be working intentionally. And because the mandible grants the most fishing speed out of any fishing rod reforge, it is technically the best one you can get on your rod if you already have 100 sea creature chance. And of course, alongside that, assuming you've maxed it, you'll get a nice 13% health reduction, which is a pretty good bonus. So yeah, that's what it does. But do I think it was worth going for? Well, yeah, but not because of the item itself. Frankly, I don't even need it since I already maxed my fishing skill from the amount of Flag Blast I fished up during the Believer steps. The reason I'm glad I went for it is simply because of what happened by doing so. I got a lot of enjoyment out of this hunt, mainly when I was either thinking of ideas or just casually talking to the hunters, which was what I spent a majority of my time doing. And because of the community aspect and the fact that there were hundreds, if not thousands of people who participated, it not only made things more interesting, but it also meant I was able to meet some pretty cool people that I wouldn't have been able to otherwise. One thing I find funny is that even though we started by calling this the Kuudra Mandible hunt, for most of its duration, it really felt like the Kuudra follower hunt instead. Almost all of the steps were based on getting the armor pieces, and I got a lot more enjoyment in going for those than I ever did in thinking of what a minor health reduction can mean for me. Also, a bit of a fun fact, it turns out that when we got the mandible, it was actually bugged and had a 100% drop rate from the chests. So I didn't just get one mandible, I actually got 5 mandibles. Unfortunately, this didn't last because only about an hour later, its drop rate was corrected to its intended 1% or so. And since you can only get the mandible if you have finished this entire hunt, I'm pretty sure its supply on the bazaar is going to stay low for a while. It might not sell for as much as I initially said at the start of this video, but in this particular instance, I think all that matters is that we got it to the point of existing, and that we had a good time in doing so. Before I end this video, I just want to say that all of this has been in the works for an entire year now, and well, I hope you enjoyed it. This is definitely the most fun I've had making a video, so if you liked it, maybe consider subscribing for whenever my next upload is a thing. I mentioned this earlier, but if you find yourself checking out at the Hypixel store, maybe consider using code PIG for 5% off. You get a nice discount and I get a small kickback, and it helps me out a ton, which I really appreciate. Real quick, I would like to thank Dueces for creating the initial version of the hunt, Jacob for updating and maintaining the hunt, and Landon for expanding on the hunt in the end. None of them had to do any of these things, so it just means a lot. I'd also like to thank anyone who contributed their ideas in any way whatsoever, and also, I would like to thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed.